this is an important part of the struggle that we are in. There is a lot of anger in this country. There's a lot of passion. People really are deeply frustrated. Your first job is to harness that frustration and turn it in the right direction, not in the direction that political power wants it to go. And the problem is, the debate is so narrow and so empty and so dysfunctional at this point that people are lining up in camps that don't make any sense. Your job is to leap over the barriers between camps, to take people who are angry and bring them into a broad movement that addresses the most fundamental question in the history of this republic. That is whether corporations are going to dominate every aspect of our lives. It's not about politics and elections. Citizens United is about every single aspect of your life. The sign-ons to those federal amendments matter. But so too does the state-based work where we're going out and asking legislatures to make a call on Congress to do a constitutional convention or to do action on these issues. Because the fact of the matter is it's going to be much easier to generate that energy, generate those calls from the grassroots. And we have to steal a page from the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which responded to the Patriot Act, by getting city councils, town boards, state legislatures across the country to pass resolutions on these issues. And you say, yeah, but that's not going to change it. Passing a resolution in Stoughton, Wisconsin, or in Valdez, Alaska, that's not going to do anything. Well, I have covered Patriot Act fights. And I have had conservative Republicans say to me, I'm going to vote against this extension of it because all these people in my home district pass these resolutions. I don't want to mess with that. It matters a lot, and those are doable fights. So, we're starting. We got to amend the Constitution, by the way. I hope I don't even have to tell you that. Anybody who thinks you can do anything but amend the Constitution on this is joking with themselves. But you start with those federal amendments. You look at state-based action. You look at local action, all generating toward a message. The fundamental message is that our democracy is in absolute crisis. It's in meltdown crisis. And when I say that, it's not a casual line. I'm not throwing it away. The fact of the matter is that when you have a national movement for change that elects the first African-American president of the United States by the widest margin of any Democrat elected president of the United States since Lyndon Johnson, and it gives him a Congress with the widest Democratic margins that any Democratic president has had since Lyndon Johnson. It gives them all this power, and you get a health care reform that Richard Nixon would have thought was too tepid to bother with. And that's the bottom line reality. We have dumbed down our politics left and right and center. Our center is so dumbed down that it's virtually meaningless. And we're going to drive tens of millions of people away from the political process because if change is so tepid, if change is so meaningless, if change has so little effect on your life, then democracy itself is going to become less meaningful. So your job here today and tomorrow, and as you work with these groups, whichever group you get involved in, is to figure out how to be deeply involved in the building of small d democracy as a functional tool, again, in this society. And that's going to take more than just an amendment on Citizens United. It's going to take an immense amount of involvement at the local, regional, state, and national levels on a host of issues. And I'll close off by suggesting that you're on hallowed ground for such activities. It was on the Hill out there that Civil War veterans sat around with German socialists and imagined a progressive movement. And that progressive movement that came out of this state never proposed half steps. In fact, there's always a joke, that La Follette didn't really want the communists in the progressive movement. And they would ask him why, and he said, because they're so moderate. They ask for so little. And it wasn't that that La Follette was a communist. He wasn't. He was far more radical. He believed, he actually had faith in the people. He didn't even think they had to go through a re-education. He thought they could do it right now. And his spirit came from having seen the Civil War. See, this country founded in original sin. Original sin. Human bondage. Nothing worse than that. And working class kids from Pecatonica, Wisconsin, and Platteville, and Muscadet, and Boscobel joined the Union forces and went off, and they marched up the side of hills at which Confederate batteries shot down at them. And they fell one after another to their death for the purpose of freeing slaves. And they didn't particularly care about the Union. One of the great rewrites of history, the Civil War was all about, maintaining the Union. I have been to the Civil War memorials that were built during the Civil War, not by those who rewrote the history. And those memorials show the hands of Wisconsinites gripping the hands of African Americans and helping them to break the chains of slavery. The Civil War was a radical effort to end the sin of human bondage in this country, and the progressives understood it as such. La Follette said, we march into the 20th century with the purpose of ending the sin of monopoly capital and corporate control of this republic. And they didn't do so by half steps. The Progressive Platform of 1924 proposed amendment after amendment after amendment. And my favorite amendment, one that becomes very appropriate today, and you'll talk about a lot of amendments, not just the Citizens United one. My favorite amendment that the Progressives proposed back in 1924, how visionary they were, was that federal judges, including Supreme Court judges, be elected, not appointed. They looked at the whole framework of American democracy, and they said, how does it work? How do we make it work better? And how do we assure that if we do make it work better, nothing gets in our way? That we don't pass visionary legislation and then have it struck down by the courts. That corporate power doesn't realize that it's losing at the ballot box and then come around the back door and win at the judicial bench. Now, they looked at it all up and down that way because they knew that they were up against a force that would look at it that way and always find a route in, a way to beat them. And they weren't going to get beat. They were not about reform. They were not about reform. They were about fundamental, small d, democratic change with the purpose of transforming the United States from a promise into a reality. They really believed that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were not merely promises, but commitments. And they wanted to make those commitments real. Now, if that's the way you go at this struggle, you will become very frightening to a lot of people. You will become unsettled. And there will be folks who will push back at you. They'll say the same stuff about you that they say about the Tea Party folks. Oh, they're crazy. They're dangerous. Watch out, and you don't know what they're going to do next. And that's good. Because right now, progressives are too afraid of the other side. Right? They've been pushed at too much. They're willing to consider a little reform. Well, no, a little reform isn't going to solve any problem. Transformation is going to solve a problem. Robert M. La Follette was right. Mere passive citizenship is no longer sufficient. Active citizenship that makes real the promise for all Americans, that is what is necessary. And we're going to have a great 5 or 6 years in this country. It's going to be a wonderful next 5 or 6 years.